Katarina, thank you so much for joining the show today. Very excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I was reflecting before our interview how relationships are often an area that is neglected or maybe not thought of. And it's actually the very first podcast episode, and I've done over 300 episodes, where I cover the topic of relationships. So I'm very excited to have you here. Tell me, why do you think that is that people neglect and don't reflect on their relationships?
Yeah, great question. And I think it is, well, I think it's societal conditioning, first and foremost. I think we all grow up with this narrative because we live in a capitalist society where we have a pretty clear outcome, which is, to be a good worker and to make your money and to be a good kind of member of the community by making money. And the idea of romantic love and relationships, you think about Hollywood, you think about fairy tales, you think about the stories that we've grown up with. We see our parents often, if they're still together, but we kind of see them and we assume that if I do all these things correctly, if I go get my education or, climb up the ladder, if I get the good job, if I get the pay rise, if I buy the house, whatever it might be, if I tick off these societal boxes, then the relationship will come. It's kind of like the prize. And then when it comes, when I find my person, then everything's great because I found them. I've arrived. I remember that's what I thought when I met my ex-fiance and we got engaged. Even though the relationship was a hot mess, I still felt like I've made it. I've made it. I've made it through the wilderness. I've made it. I'm now engaged. Everything's going to be okay from here. And of course it's not. There's a lot of studies to show that actually when people walk down the aisle and make that big commitment to each other, that is the moment when they revert back to their quote unquote kind of authentic self, which is going to be a mimicking of their primary caregivers, of their mother or their father, which is why in dating it's so important to look at what are the parents like? What kind of relationship do they have? What kind of behaviors do they have? What are their household duties like? Right? Because very often we're going to revert back to that. And so even if you've done a lot of therapy, like you can still revert back to it. It's kind of in your genetic blueprint, right? So I just think there's kind of assumption that it's all going to work out and we have to focus on other things. And especially if you're a man, right? The assumption there is you have to go and make your money and have the assets and kind of be a worthy candidate of the attractive wife or the attractive partner who also becomes another status symbol. So it's all kind of a bit jumbled up when we think about the cultural narrative. And at no point does anyone say, well, relationships are going to be your biggest growth path. And actually, when you're in a relationship, that's when all of your BS comes up and you have to go deal with all of your childhood wounds and you have to go deal with all of those different narratives that are running the show. But actually, relationships, I would argue, are some of, if not the most difficult things that we will ever have to navigate because they're so confronting, because they bring up our stuff so much. But because of that, they actually bring us the greatest route for healing and for becoming the best version of ourselves, right? That's why I love relationships. I mean, I do money mindset coaching, I do career coaching, I do all this stuff. But fundamentally, I'm like, the fastest way to get you the results you want is to look at your relationships. It's a direct mirror. Whatever's going on for you internally and in romantic love, it's going to be what's happening externally. We just need to look at that. It's kind of like a hack to get results in other areas of your life.
I often also feel that our business is a mirror of who we are. So maybe it's
Yeah.
our business, our relationships, they all are reflections of all the stuff we haven't dealt with. Because what you're saying right now in terms of relationships is exactly what I see in terms of business. So
Yeah.
if we have all this inner self-doubt, if we have all these fears, if we don't believe in ourselves, if we're just hustling, trying to prove something to ourselves or society, this will show in the business. So it's interesting to hear the exact same
Yeah.
comparison, which is true because ultimately all our inner world and all our stuff
Yeah.
gets reflected in everything we do.
Yeah. I agree with you on the business side, right? I don't think career, I think if you're in a corporate career, it's not the same. But I agree. I think if you're a founder and you're building a business, it is a marriage of sorts because you've made this commitment. You don't really know each other and you're kind of going boldly into the unknown. And it is very vulnerable. It's very confronting and there's a lot of ups and downs and you're learning a lot of things and you might have to get some outside counsel to help you. So I agree with you. I think that building a business is as confronting as a romantic relationship. I think the difference with the business is that ultimately, yes, you individually go into those kind of deep, vulnerable, scary places where, your wounding around money might come up, or your wounding around imposter syndrome, whatever it might be. But in romantic love, it's thrown back at you because you're with a living, breathing human being who might not tolerate it, right? Who might not like it, who might ask you to change. Whereas in a business, I feel like you can kind of not compartmentalize. Obviously, if it's your revenue generating machine, you can't run from it, but you can kind of like distract yourself a little bit. There's just like a little bit less there. At least I found in my own business compared to my marriage.
I think they're all in different ways and different lenses. And I
Yeah.
was thinking actually you can hide a bit more in a relationship
Oh,
because you don't have to
interesting.
show all your cards or all your weaknesses, but in business, they will be there. So, for
Yeah.
instance, if you have some fear of failure, that might not show up in the same way in a marriage. But if you have fear of failure and therefore you're not taking any bold actions in
Mm,
your business, there will be a consequence. Like you said, not immediate, not the business talking
yeah.
at you, but the numbers will. And so it's interesting, but I think they both do in different ways.
Yeah.
Why do you think that relationships make such a big difference? We spoke a bit at the beginning, the impact of relationship in our life. What is that?
Yeah. So there's a beautiful analogy that I remember kind of landed on me, and I did this. This came to me when I think it was after I'd done like a really big psychedelic trip, and I had this like vision, right? And I'd always heard that relationships are, the hardest journey we ever go through, and they're the most kind of reckoning of our identities and of our souls. And I was like, yeah, I get that. They're also hard and unpleasant because, again, I was with my ex and things were really challenging. And it dawned on me that when you're going through the power struggle phase in a relationship, which is a crucial phase that every couple has to go through, you are going to be forced to look at all of the different wounds and all of the different patterns and limiting beliefs and all of your own triggers that have been buried inside of you, and probably no one has triggered inside of you for a very long time. They've been dormant. It's very easy to be single and meditate every day and feel great and feel secure and feel healed and be like, nothing phases me. I'm really great. I love myself. I have great self-worth. Go get into a relationship, especially with someone that you really love and you really care about and you feel very vulnerable with, and watch yourself melt, right? Like that's when all your stuff comes up. And there's something there about when you are in a place of love and connection and vulnerability, and your heart space is essentially cracked open, not only do you open the floodgates to feeling a lot of love and feeling that connection with another human being, which is really quite a spiritual thing, but you also open the floodgates for all of your shit to come up to the surface and start wreaking havoc, right? And so I think that when we get into these romantic relationships, it's like both beautiful and incredible and amazing, but also really challenging. The opportunity here, though, is that you get to actually clean up the stuff that comes up. Because if you weren't ever to be in love or truly vulnerable or truly connected, it just stays buried in there. You just don't see it. I know for myself, like my story was that, I grew up with a father who was a coach as well as an executive coach. And he threw Tony Robbins upon me when I was really young. My dad went on to he did some work with people like Joe Dispenza, Richard Branson, like really big figures. And he's really good friends like Joe Vitale and all these people who specialize in this kind of subconscious mind work. So he threw it upon me. And from a really young age, I knew it. I did my NLP and hypnotherapy when I was 17. I was so young. And I did it and I applied it. And so by the time I was 28 or so, yes, my parents had had a divorce, I'd had anorexia, like I'd had challenges, but I'd overcome them. And I was feeling so good at 28. I was like, I'm healed. I've figured out my parent stuff. I've healed my body issues. I've healed like my money issues. I had a great corporate job. I was like, I am good. Got into a serious relationship, got engaged. And it's like all of my demons just came up, right? Because of that level of commitment, that level of vulnerability, that level of intensity. All of my stuff came up. And that's when it really dawned on me that, oh, you can do all the personal development in the world, but until you've looked at how you relate in relationships, how you attach, how you show up, you're missing a really key piece of the puzzle. Like you're really missing a key piece of the puzzle. And I will say that when I actually ended that engagement, because it didn't work out for various reasons, and I really buckled down and did so much work on my relationships, on myself, on my core wounds. Like I really I took everything that I had learned in hypnotherapy and NLP and somatic work and all of this stuff, and I embodied it and practiced it on a level that I hadn't done before with regards to myself and how I am in relationships. And pretty soon after, I met my husband, and obviously we have a very, very different, wonderful relationship now. But it's so interesting how that was the kind of the the cracking open of myself to deal with my stuff that led me to then having a much more rewarding career, making much more money, having much better health. I lost weight. Like all of these wonderful side effects happened. And I truly believe, and I see this with my clients, that is because I actually looked at this piece of the puzzle that we so often don't, right? We kind of push it down, we're like, don't want to see it. Final thing I'll say is I'm actually working with a gentleman who's, his net worth, I think is like 600 million now or some insane figure. He is working with me and advocating so much of this work because as he heads over to a $1 billion exit, he's like, I need to crack through my relationship blocks because if I don't do this, who's to say that all of this money isn't going to corrupt me? I'm not going to lose it. It's not going to make me more unhappy. The money doesn't mean anything, right? It's your relationship to it. It's a relationship to yourself. And so it's really cool seeing someone who gets it on that level and is choosing to prioritize his relationships at this point in his evolution when, others might look at him and think, what's the problem? You're married, you've got all this money, like, what's the issue, right? But he gets it. And that's so cool seeing that. I don't even remember your first question now. You've gone off on a tangent.
Why it was important, but I think you shared why it was
Oh
important.
yeah, sorry,
And I
yeah.
specifically love what you said about how you worked on yourself after that relationship didn't work out, because I think a big part of it is the willingness to work on ourselves for the relationship to work. And I think one of the core issues is when we start to blame, obviously going to victim mindset and say, my partner always does this, my partner's always like that. So a lot of the conversations we've had with my partner, we have very different personalities. I'm highly extroverted, he's very introverted. And a lot of it has been, what can I do? How can I manage, being very extroverted, wanting to go out more, for instance, when he wants more alone time, maybe I schedule to see a friend, maybe I have a call, instead of what I used to do in the early days of our relationship. We've been together 11 years. In the early days is, why can't we spend more time together? Why can't we do more fun things? And totally depriving him of his own alone time. That does not work as a strategy. For all of you that are with introverts, do not steal their alone time just because you are greedy for more time. This does not work. Find your own strategies to cope with it. So this is maybe linked to the next question, which is, what are some of the patterns? What are some of the struggles that you've seen with the relationships and the couples you work with?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I will say I tend to work with people who are quote unquote high achieving. And the kind of the paradox is that people who are high achieving don't really think they're high achieving, right? They're like, oh, I haven't done enough. Like, who am I? Imposter syndrome everywhere. But I work with these people because, first of all, that was me and is me still. But there are certain patterns, to your point, that I see repeatedly over and over and over again. And so one of the patterns that I see a lot of is, and I see this more with men, it's somebody who is very successful professionally and, maybe financially they're doing well, or somehow they seem to be well resourced, right? They have abundance around them. And professionally they're great, they have direction, they know what they're doing. But romantically, their relationship feels disconnected. They feel quite lonely. They feel quite unsupported. They often don't feel that they're getting much validation. They're not getting much approval from their partner. The narrative I hear so often from men is, here I am, I do a 10, 12-hour day. I come home and she hasn't even laid the table for me because she just kind of assumes I'm not going to make it to dinner because I'm working in the office so often. And actually, after dinner, we try to reconnect. We sit on the couch, we turn on the TV, she's on her phone scrolling through Instagram. No one understands why the wives are on Instagram. And she's not really interested. And then he's kind of like, well, what's the point? I don't matter. What's the point, right? And kind of retreats back to the office. And this cycle continues. So I see that a lot. And the patterns there are this belief inside of the men very often that they're going to be lonely, they're going to be alone, that they don't matter, that they're unlovable, that they're unloved, that they're not wanted, that they've been rejected. Like there's a lot of these stories going on, right? they've been there since childhood. And actually, it's these very stories, the classic kind of amalgamation of the I'm not good enough wound, that has fueled so much of their success. Because if you have a core belief that you're going to be lonely, you're going to be unsupported, that you don't matter, well, what do you think you're going to do externally? You're going to work a lot harder. You're going to try to prove that you actually do matter, that you actually are supported by going out there and making tons of your own money and success to support yourself. And you're going to try to connect with other people as much as you can. So you're probably going to be married, but you're not going to feel it, right? Because you have that wound of being lonely. And so I see that a lot of the time. Amongst women, what I see very often is that the woman, and this is so interesting because this was me for a long time, and it's in all my friendship circles. I kind of look at it yesterday and I was like, my friends are my clients. And what is that about? But it's this kind of very hardworking female who has a wounding around being misunderstood, right? So maybe she was very intellectual throughout her life. Maybe she was a bit of a nerd. Or maybe her parents misunderstood, maybe her father misunderstood her. That's a really big one, especially culturally, right? So maybe she's been feeling misunderstood her whole life, not even aware of it though. It's just something subconscious. And so she's been feeling misunderstood, not feeling good enough, not feeling safe, a very common one I see amongst a lot of women. And so what has she gone and done? Well, she's gone and become very successful. She's fought really hard to climb that ladder, to prove herself. She's been craving validation and approval her whole life, much like the men. And so she's built this like kind of castle around her of this great job, whether it's corporate or her own business. She's made the money. She's very much likely the breadwinner in the dynamic. And there's another wound here, similar to the men, the loneliness wound. And so because she's this breadwinner and because she's responsible for everyone, including, the kids and the husband, and she's kind of the primary earner, she feels trapped, right? And that trapped feeling has been with her whole life. Very often that's a societal conditioning. A lot of women do feel very trapped by the cultural narratives that they've grown up with. And so she's kind of recreated her own suffering later in life, where she's now got these golden handcuffs. She's working hard. She feels lonely. She feels unsupported. Her husband's an assistant, quote unquote. That's what I hear a lot of. He does the cooking and the cleaning. I mean, I say that as my husband's literally making me breakfast right now, right? So it's a very, very common narrative. But there's this feeling of kind of being denied something, because when I meet these women, they really want their husbands to step up. They really want to feel like they can relax and they can depend on their husband, that he can take charge and he can take responsibility. And I think what's really interesting here, this is a bit of a side piece, there's a lot of BS out there in pop culture, on Instagram, even on LinkedIn, for crying out loud, around masculinity and femininity and polarity. And I literally did my master's degree studying gender dynamics at Oxford, right? So I feel very well versed in this topic. A lot of that is such nonsense. It's just very oversimplified rubbish. There is absolutely no reason why women cannot be the breadwinner, cannot be very successful, cannot be the main provider for the family. What matters more is the balance and the trust and the safety in the dynamic, right? And that's the key thing that's missing. It's not that he's not masculine enough. It's not that you're too masculine. It's none of that. You're a full-rounded human being. You get to do whatever you want to do. And if you're gifted with talent, and if you're smart and successful and able to print money, great. Go do that. We need more women doing that. It's not that he's not masculine. It's that you fundamentally don't trust him. It's that you don't feel safe, and that he likely doesn't know what your needs are. And so there needs to be communication around that. And there's probably a whole backlog of resentment there, right? Because you haven't been communicating for a long time. There's resentment, there are betrayals. You've been feeling misunderstood by him because you haven't really opened up and been vulnerable with him, because you've been so busy working. So there's a lot of these patterns that show up. And it's so interesting how these are the two main, I guess, archetypes, right, that I work with. The lonely, both are lonely at the top, fundamentally. Both are lonely at the top. And the problem itself might feel like, well, I've grown apart from my partner, I have to leave them. Maybe it's my career, maybe I've worked too hard, maybe ambition has changed. It's none of those things. No, you don't have to leave them 9 times out of 10. You just have to heal your own subconscious wounds, your own kind of core wounding, heal that so that you're seeing the relationship more clearly, and so that you can begin to respond and communicate to your partner differently, start to articulate what it is that you need deep down, which most people don't know because they've buried and repressed their needs, thinking they're never going to get them met. And then from that place, you can watch your partner step up and actually meet you in a more fulfilling way. And I see that time and time and time again. But it starts with working on yourself, to your point. It's not blaming your partner, right? As much as that feels like the easier thing to do, it's not the most effective.
Very interesting that the high achievers, whether it's men or women, all have this loneliness. And in the case of women, more this fear of being misunderstood. In the case of men, maybe needing that validation more. And both of them probably overcompensate or try and find that in the business or the career or somewhere else in their life. And talking about Tony Robbins that you mentioned earlier, I remember in one of his trainings how he said that if we put all our eggs in one basket, it's never a good idea. So if you're seeking all the validation and approval and fulfillment in your life just from the business and career, that's always a dangerous move, because what happens when that doesn't work out, or you don't want to do that anymore, or you retire? And he gives examples, I know, about elite athletes where the sport was really everything and then they get injured and they go into depression. And that example really stuck with me, because I remember thinking, always have eggs in different baskets in terms of fulfillment, not just focus on the business, also have hobbies, also nurture your relationship, also take care of your health, and try and be a bit more balanced everywhere. So we've seen now some of the struggles that was really clear and fantastically observed with men and women. So very interesting. Now, what are some of the solutions? Because you help these people over several months to go from this state where they may be feeling detached and happy in their relationship to feeling fulfilled and happy again. What are some of the things that really helps to shift the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, another great question. And this kind of really leads us, I guess, to my methodology, right? Irrespective of whether someone comes to me for a career issue or a money issue, whatever it might be, because like I said, I do executive coaching as well as relationship coaching. It's kind of the same thing, because the process is the same, right? Just some people don't want to admit they have relationship issues, but then when I send the intake form, I'm like, right. Anyway, we all have relationship issues. The first thing that's most important is for me to understand what are the different core wounds, what are the different narratives, psychological blockers, limiting beliefs, whatever you want to call it. What are the different stories, I guess, that have been running this person's subconscious from a very young age? And we know that between the ages of 0 and 8, your brain is like a little sponge. I mean, our brains are like sponges most of the time. But between 0 and 8, your brain is not even fully developed, right? You don't have the beta waves actually going for you. So you're kind of in this light state of hypnosis in your childhood, meaning everything that you see around you, you take on as fact. So the way that your parents are, you begin to mimic, right? You begin to kind of watch how they behave and you begin to mimic that back. You learn through repetition. Whatever you hear your parents say, you begin to interpret and make conclusions about yourself, like this is how the world is. And whatever you feel, same thing. Children have an egocentrism, you make it about yourself, meaning if your parents are absent, like mine were both, PhDs, we were in Slovakia where I was born, Soviet Union was collapsing, there was a lot of stress, a lot of kind of panic in the air. So inevitably I had an unsafety wound, right? Because I literally felt that sense of unsafety and that instability. And my parents were both very busy. They were both working really hard, trying to move to the West. And so they were absent. Not their fault. They were physically there in the apartment with me, but they were busy. And so as a little kid, the interpretations I made in my head were, I'm going to be alone. At times it was even I've been abandoned, because my dad started traveling to go to the UK, which is where we moved. And I'm misunderstood because I'd be, crying out for attention and they would tell me off. So it's like, well, I've been misunderstood here. I don't matter. What's another big wound for me? I'm unsafe, obviously. I had a ton of money issues because, again, Soviet Union collapsing, economic system changing. I grew up with a lot of very unhelpful beliefs around money and my role in the world and what money meant. And a whole flurry of other wounds developed, right? I had a ton when I started this work. I mean, I went on to have anorexia, right? So go figure. But I had a ton of these wounds. And the interesting thing is, I didn't know that I had them. I'm a little kid, right? They just become part of my worldview. They become part of my brain, part of my identity, part of my belief system, and part of the filter through within which I see the world. Meaning, as I grow up later in life, I view the world through this lens. I go on to believe that I'm just a lonely kid. I always said, I'm a lone wolf. I'm more of that kind of independent worker, didn't like teamwork. I didn't feel safe in it, didn't know that, but I was just like, no, I'm just a lone wolf, I'm like an intellectual, and that was always my identity. And I'm not saying it didn't serve me, but it came with its own baggage, right? It came with its own limitations. And so the number one thing I always want to do with a client is look at what is the wounding, what is the narrative that has shaped your identity from a young age, and how is that showing up in your life now? Let's get really clear on that. Let's actually begin to unpack that. How's it showing up in your romantic relationship? How is it showing up in your relationship with money, in your career, in your friendships, in your family, in your hobbies, in your self-care? And then once we have an understanding of that, step number 2 is let's change that. And this is where we actually do quote unquote rewiring, even though you can't actually rewire the mind. It's reconditioning, reprogramming. You're not literally rewiring it. But it's really about how can we begin to change those neural pathways and let the old ones with those old messages begin to die off, because they're not actually true. They're just a neural pathway. You can change that and start building new ones which are better, more aligned with the truth, right? And the truth is, I have yet to meet anyone who's destined to be lonely, even if you're an introvert. I've yet to meet anyone who's unworthy. I've yet to meet anyone who doesn't matter. These are all lies. It's kind of like an illusion that we've lived through. So we want to recondition the brain to get rid of these. When you've got rid of them, that is when you inevitably start to see yourself and the relationship differently. It's like you're kind of beginning, it's like you've got upgraded glasses, right? You begin to see things more clearly. And so this one client of mine, for example, she came to me, panicked. I need your help planning my divorce. I need an exit plan. I need to leave my husband. Like, things have been really bad for like 8 years, a long time. Now they've really escalated. I need a way out. So I'm like, okay, cool. Let's plan a plan B. But before we start planning your exit, let's clear out the blocks. So just clear out the wounds and see what happens. So I made a plan B, which helped her feel safe, cleared out the blocks, or at least kind of helped her identify them, which itself is a really big step. Began to do the reconditioning. She was a great student. And then lo and behold, she begins to see her partner differently. She begins to see, oh, okay, this is my projection. This is actually my interpretation. This is actually how I'm showing up here. She began to behave differently, right? Because as you change your internal belief system, you begin to behave differently. As she began to behave differently, he began to behave differently. He began to observe. And then what happened, and I see this so often, is that the partner starts to be like, what's happened to you? You're acting really different. You're a different person. And that's when they might say, well, the truth is, I have a relationship coach, because the truth is, a few months back, I was actually planning a divorce. And that is often something that's not been really said, right? Very often we have this kind of exit plan, or we're feeling terrible and wretched, but we haven't told our partner the extent to which how bad we have felt. And so when that kind of revelation comes up, that's when it's like gold happens, because the person's like, oh shit, okay, steps up, starts to really do the work, right? And so from that place, when you've cleared out the blocks, I start working with that individual to help them identify beneath all the blocks, now that they're leaving, who are you? What do you really need? Beyond the big house and the money and, the corporate title, what do you actually really need on that deeper, more vulnerable level? And let's get really granular here. Let's really unpack those tender vulnerabilities that you might have pushed down and repressed because they're just, they're a bit uncomfortable. You maybe didn't think that you'd ever get them met. Let's get really clear on those needs. And then let's start to actually communicate those to your partner. And that's when I start to bring in, the relationship science and communication tools and the Gottman Institute and blah, blah, blah. And let's actually start to build a life where your needs are getting met. And when your needs are getting met, that's when you start to get more energy, feel more inspired, feel happier, feel better. Your relationship starts to blossom, right? And then from that place, we just continue to add strategies, but the strategies are actually sticking because you've cleared the blocks. So again, it doesn't really matter whether someone's single and they want to find love, or they're married and they're not sure about it. I always want to look at what are the blocks that are blocking you. Let's change those and then see what unfolds. And I will say, I've had a couple of instances where, they got rid of the blocks and saw very clearly I don't want to be with this person anymore. That happened to me with my ex-fiance. It was just no, this is not moving at the pace I need it to move. And we are just fundamentally different people. And value-wise, I don't see this aligning. I don't see my needs getting met here. I don't see his needs getting met here. The right thing to do is for me to leave. But that frees you up to then find the right person, right? So I always say it's kind of win-win. It's always win-win to do this work. It's, the outcome's always going to be a good one, even if there's a bit of a turbulent time to get there, but it's always going to be a good outcome.
Yeah, that's what you were saying at the beginning, how relationship is a direct mirror of where we're at. And in general, everything outside of us is a mirror of where we're at. So if we clear everything internally, things around us shift, because like you said, our behavior then shifts and other people shift to respond to our behavior. And so this will alternate everything. And it's true what you were saying, that very last part around it being challenging, at times a bit of a turbulent phase. I often say that personal growth is really, really tough, and it has this fake, fluffy image because we think of just affirmations and stuff, which are fine. But
Mhm.
obviously, doing the actual work, going through your wounds, clearing them out,
Yeah.
removing some of the traumas, working on some of your beliefs, shifting your behavior, these are all things that require a tremendous amount of courage and commitment. So wonderful to see that you're working with clients on this. We're already approaching the very end. This has just flown by. I've learned so much, Katerina. This has been fantastic. What would you like to leave the audience with? Someone who's maybe listening to this, who's maybe struggling a bit in their relationship, what
Mm.
would you like to leave them with today?
I truly believe, in fact, I know, I'm going to throw that out there, I know that everyone deserves love, right? Whatever form it takes. Doesn't mean that you have to get married, doesn't mean that you even have to be in a monogamous relationship, doesn't even have to mean that it's a romantic love, that we all are worthy and deserve love. We all deserve connection. We all deserve to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel understood, to feel safe. And when you allow yourself to have that, that's when you really connect to yourself. And when you really connect to yourself, that's when you really start to allow yourself to have all the very things that you want, to stop working the 60-hour week and grinding and struggling, to stop feeling financial scarcity, whatever it might be, to stop carrying the excess weight. So really understanding and kind of getting your head around that you are worthy and you deserve this is going to be a great starting point. It's also going to be one of the hardest, because you're probably going to have a ton of blocks that you're not even really aware of, but like resistance in the body, right? They're like, oh, like, really? I did this thing before in my past, and this thing's weird about me, and I haven't seen any evidence of, like all this stuff's going to come up. And that's when I invite you to get professional help, whether it's a coach, whether it's a therapist. Obviously, I'm biased to coaching because I just find it more forward, like more kind of momentum there. But do what you need to do, because believe me, when you've got to that place where you believe that you're worthy and you actually allow yourself to have love, that's when life really opens up. That's when it becomes really magical.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much,
That's
Katerina,
awesome.
for being here today.